Hi guys, welcome back to the Social Tune, and on today's episode of Record Roundup, we're going to be taking a look at a couple of new albums alongside some records that I missed before I made my mid-year list. And this week was overall pretty decent, with a couple of really good records, one great one, and one absolutely god-awful one. But these are the albums you guys requested, so I feel obliged to... oblige. Let's get started.
Are you coming back for me? Hope you're coming back for me.
This was one of the albums that several of you requested that I check out that passed me by earlier this year. The sophomore album of the LA-based group Electric Guest, a band that I had never heard of before checking out this project. And before you check out this album, I would strongly recommend that you check out the singles. Because if you start listening to this album the way I did, with absolutely no idea what to expect going in, the first track will seriously throw you off. To be clear, Zero is not representative of this album's overall sound, and thank God for that, because it's easily the worst song on this project. With a shrill, piercing chorus and obnoxious lyrics that I had no patience for. But again, the album does pick up, and overall ends up being an album with quite a few songs I can really see myself going back to. It's a good album. In fact, many people have compared them to another group that I covered earlier this year, who also have a bit of a cult following, namely Hippocampus. Now, personally, I would disagree with that statement. They both have a knack for great hooks, but Electric Guest is going much more for 70s disco-inspired beats rather than the more folk-inspired stuff that Hippocampus is going for. The closest they come to a Hippocampus track on this album is Back For Me, with its great bass line, thumping drums, and catchy-as-hell chorus. And even then, it's a bit more ominous than something you would hear on a Hippocampus project. Our frontman, Asa Taccone, is probably another reason why this band has the following it does, because while he's not a great vocalist, he does have a pretty good range. I really did see a lot of potential there, which he explores on Oh Devil and Dear To Me to great effect. And combined with how catchy a lot of this album is, the tight instrumentation, and the overall experimental vibe of the whole thing, I honestly ended up really enjoying this project. I'm not wild about some of the vocal production, and as experimental as they may be, I would like a bit more cohesion. But just like with Hippocampus, I see a lot of promise going forward. Now, with that said, I would place that band a shade over this one, as this album's getting a light 7 out of 10, but it's still definitely worth your time. You should definitely check out both bands. So yeah, Electric Guest, you have my attention. I look forward to seeing where you go from here.
Light nigga, dark nigga, faux nigga, real nigga, rich nigga, po nigga, house nigga, field nigga, still nigga, still nigga.
My relationship with Jay-Z is a complicated one. On the one hand, I've always liked his flow, and I find myself admiring just how untouchable he can seem. But on the other hand, I've never quite been able to connect with his music on an emotional level. Which makes sense, considering Jay-Z has kept a lid on his personal life, probably wanting to maintain that untouchableness. Plus, you know, he created Tidal, which sums up all of my problems with him into one terrible platform. It's exclusive for the rich and famous, and seems to be done more as a shrewd business move rather than out of love for music and music distribution. But then Beyoncé dropped Lemonade last year, and I knew that Jay-Z would have to respond with something. And to be honest, I was really worried about this one. I had a nasty feeling that Jay-Z would have no idea how to handle this, either denying everything or pointing the finger right back at her. Instead, I got pretty much the last thing I was expecting from Jay-Z, an apology. This is easily Jay-Z's most vulnerable, apologetic album to date, with some fantastic production from No ID, and a runtime of under 40 minutes. And to be honest, I really did love it, enough that I can easily say it's his best album in about 10 years. The album starts out with Kill Jay-Z, where he ruthlessly tears apart his own untouchable persona, explaining how many of his fans find it difficult to trust him, because really, why should they? On top of that, he also dives into his broken relationship with Kanye, that one time he attacked a record executive back in the day, and a number of other topics, admitting his own sins along the way. Hell of a way to open up this album. Then, on the story of OJ, he sketches out the mistakes he made back when he thought that money made him worth a damn, and encourages his audience to learn from him so that they can better support their own descendants. And that's a theme that runs through a lot of this album on songs like Legacy and Family Feud, where he's clearly torn apart that his kids may find out the terrible mistakes he's made, including betraying their mother. And speaking of that betrayal, you have 444, and holy shit! He goes in deep, diving into how he distanced himself from Beyoncé by going on tour and collaborating, not wanting to face the stillborns that she bore him. And he doesn't just want to apologize to her, but to all the women he's hurt over the course of his life. He pulls no punches and he makes no excuses. Pair that with the fantastic sampling on that song, and the fun fact that it's exactly 4 minutes and 44 seconds long, and you have an easy favorite for me. Fantastic song. And then you have the tracks that just work for me, like the extremely touching Smile featuring and about his mother, Gloria Carter, where he's so happy that she's now happy, having finally admitted her sexuality. And Moonlight, where Jay-Z calls out rappers for bragging about their temporary success, even co-opting some of their flows for a few bars before just dropping it disdainfully because it's so beneath him. I really appreciated that. So overall, Hove really surprised me with this one. It's well produced, the content is compelling, and pretty much every single song here is great. I do have a couple of personal issues, like the fact that he rhymes words with themselves a lot, and the fact that he doesn't seem to put the same amount of effort into every single one of his bars. But it's still excellent, a worthy reply to Lemonade, and while it may not be quite as powerful as that album was, it's still getting a strong 8 out of 10 from me. Damn great album, Jay. You and Beyoncé had better keep up this momentum, after you've sorted things out, of course. So, Canadian singer-songwriter Allie X, aka Alexandra Hughes. Widely respected among the indie scene, and even seeing a bit of mainstream success with her song Catch a couple of years ago. And while I've certainly heard of her before, I've never actually sat down and properly listened to her music. So since you guys were asking me to review her debut studio album, I decided this would be a good opportunity to sit down and go back through her back catalogue. And overall, I think she has a lot of talent. It's just not personally my thing, that's all. See, I stated in a video not too long ago that synth pop is my weak spot. Yeah, maybe I should have been more precise. I love colourful, bright, danceable, upbeat synth pop in the vein of the Wombats or that last Paramore album. But take something like, say, Depeche Mode, and it only kind of works for me. I don't naturally find myself gravitating towards it. And now that I've thoroughly pissed off you traditional synth pop fans, I feel comfortable in saying that this album is good, but flawed. There are some really good compositions here, like the looping mournful melody on Need You, the Asian-inspired build-up on Paper Love, and especially that tight groove on Casanova. But then you also have the weaker tracks like Vintage and That's So Us, which make this album feel a lot longer than it actually is, considering it's only 10 tracks long. And lyrically, this album dives into relationships, or possibly just one relationship, and all the dips and rises that they go through together. But unfortunately, most, if not all of these songs paint our protagonist in a position of submission and weakness, which is fine on a couple of songs, but there's never that moment where she fights back and wins us over and makes us root for her. Look at it like this: if someone was constantly put down, you'd feel sorry for them. But at some point, you'd want to see them take ownership of their situation and fight back. That never happens here, and it leaves me feeling more frustrated than sympathetic. I don't know, it's not a bad album, but she's released better EPs with better songs. For me, it's just a strong 5 out of 10. Give it a listen if you're in the mood for some weird experimental synth pop. Just not really for me, but it's not bad, and it's certainly better than this. I'll be blunt, I did not want to review this. Despite there definitely being fans of this band, every single reviewer I've seen cover this has called it awful, with one in particular calling it the worst album of the 2010s so far. And look, it's not like I actively seek out bad music to talk about. I like being surprised and having music I enjoy. This just seemed like a project that would be bad no matter how I looked at it, so the question became less would it be bad and more how bad it would be. And I won't mince words, this was painful to sit through. I won't quite call it the worst thing that I've heard this decade. Kid Cudi's Speedin' Bullet to Heaven still holds that spot by quite a big margin, but it's still easily one of the most grating projects, probably the most grating I've heard since Miley Cyrus and Her Dead Pets back in 2015. Yes, that bad. And the main issue, it comes in the instrumentation. Believe it or not, I actually think that some of these compositions on their own do show some promise, like the pretty good strings on the good part, or on Sober Up and Call My Dad, the latter being the only song on this album I actually kind of like. It's not great, but I definitely relate to a song where our protagonist calls his dad in the early hours of the morning to save him. You know, minus the complete lack of apologies on the song. The problem is that the mixing and the execution on these tracks is some of the worst that I have ever heard on an album before. This album has so many moments where you just feel like you're being yelled at, and far from feeling anthemic, it feels braying and obnoxious. This is certainly not helped by our frontman, who alternates between a tolerable lower range and an utterly insufferable falsetto that sets my teeth on edge. And lyrically, oh boy, it is rare that I want to slap someone this badly while listening to their album. From the self-reflective tone on Weak that completely squanders any atmosphere that it had built up by actively encouraging its audience to make mistakes, to the drinking anthem Bud Like You, which is one of the most blatant commercial jingles I've ever heard on an album, to the song Drama, which is high school personified and is somehow even more unpleasant, to the ear-bleeding The Good Part, where our protagonist just wants to skip all the work and effort and just wants to be famous. This is basically a parody of millennials played by guys in their mid to late 20s, only if it were played seriously. Combine that with just how much this project blatantly steals from John Bellion, and you have a project that I can barely sit through. But hey, you all knew that. The only reason so many of you asked me to cover this is so I could tear it a new one, so this shouldn't surprise you. Now again, there are elements to this album that I can tolerate, like Sober Up and Call My Dad, but that's only because I connect them to fond memories. They're still terrible on a musical level. And considering how much this album reminds me of Miley Cyrus and Her Dead Pets, I'm gonna give this album the same score I gave that one, namely a light 2 out of 10. God awful listen, please stay away from this album unless you're really curious, in which case, on your own head be it.
Tell me how you feel, 'cause I got something to tell you, but I don't know why. It's so hard to let you know that we're not singing eye to eye, because I know if I tell you.
Talking about Haim always seems to spawn controversy. On the one hand, they're a pop trio who many critics have praised in the indie scene, but on the other hand, they haven't released any new music since their debut album in 2013, unless you count Little of Your Love, which appears on this album anyway. And I'll be honest, for as much praise as they got back then, I was never really on board. I mean, they're okay, but considering how many people were comparing them to Fleetwood Mac, which is happening way too often by the way, that band is a treasure, do not disgrace them, I certainly didn't see the same level of talent or promise on their debut. And this, their sophomore effort, is pretty much exactly the same. It is kind of weird that there is more of a cohesive theme on this album, and yet it doesn't flow nearly as well as their debut. And this really does come down to a lack of cohesion in the production. The basic melodies on this song are honestly pretty good, but unfortunately whoever was in charge of the production here was determined to make several spots sound incredibly clunky and cacophonous. The squonking mixed with the doo-wop style on Little of Your Love, the breathy, warping interlude on Nothing's Wrong that comes right the fuck out of nowhere, the high-pitched squealing that comes in on Want You Back that completely robs the song of its own beauty. This album trips itself up way too often. And lyrically, well, okay, it's a little more interesting, I suppose. It's basically a string of songs about trying to get back together with this guy, despite the fact that he cheated on our protagonist, or at the very least isn't interested in her. Normally, this would exasperate me and I'd be inclined to tell them to just move on, but Haim is smart enough to make it clear that our protagonist isn't quite sure why she wants this. She just wants to be in love, to be close to someone. And you know, I get that, I really do. But the writing isn't detailed enough to be compelling, and they don't really throw any twists into the story. It plays out exactly as you'd expect. So overall, this album is a light 6 out of 10. Look, Haim is a fine trio, but if we're talking about a true masterpiece from a trio of female singer-songwriters, Case Langveer's self-titled album was released last year, it was in my top 10 albums of the year overall, and it's not going anywhere. You definitely should check that out first. Believe me, I haven't found a person who disliked it yet. So, thank you guys for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed. In case you were wondering where I was for the past week, I was out of the country in a place where there was no Wi-Fi, which is why I didn't post anything until that track review a couple of days ago, or was that yesterday? Depends when this is uploaded. Either way, please subscribe so you don't miss a thing, and until the next time, I'm Finn, and this is the Social Tunes signing off.